There's no question that I think it affects everything about my life, from the work that I've chosen to do, to become a social worker. To me, I can't imagine doing anything else. I feel like just being the child of a survivor, like the values of concern for the world, for the environment, for each other, for humanity was just instilled in me at birth. So it's very natural for me to have chosen the work that I have. But within that work, I feel like particularly drawn to trauma and other people who go through trauma. And I think, so I worked in domestic violence and sexual abuse for many, many years. Well, it's interesting. I don't know if I chose the subject or the subject chose me. My interest is always in working in some type of social justice issue that I can feel passionate about, and that came my way. If I were to try to analyze myself and how that came about, I would connect it to being the child of a Holocaust survivor, and maybe having, while I talk about his experience and what I've inherited in many of the things, it's possible that there are many ways in which I'm not addressing the intergenerational transmission of the trauma within myself. And I think by really connecting with and being part of the healing of other people going through all other different types of trauma, somehow I feel like that must be connected. Yes. Yeah. There's so many ways in just, how I live my life every day, how I dress, what you'll find in my bag at any given time. I feel like I just have this need to always be prepared. My bag always has water. I always have a water bottle attached to me. If I walk, from a room to another room, I feel like I'm carrying water with me. I always make sure I have something to read, something, pens. I always have a bag that always has things in it. And so I connect that to just always needing to be prepared and ready for anything, and being able to run if I needed to.
So that's why you're so athletic?
Is that why I'm so athletic? I don't know, potentially. I think it is hard for me to sit still in my life. I do like to sit still. I do some meditation and things like that, but I am very active, I'm very engaged. I think we're taught and instilled in us that we have to be part of this world. We have to use ourselves. We can't let anything, go to waste. I don't let a morsel of food go to waste. Tiny crumbs I can figure out how to do something with. My scraps from when I'm making salad or vegetables, I'm bringing the scraps to be composted in my community garden. I'm making jewelry this is from recycled, from the coffee that they now have all of these machines. They've got these metal pods, metal tins. So I'm finding use for everything, even for what people call waste or garbage. And I think all of that is connected to my dad really having to be without and having to get by and having to take advantage of any little thing that can be found. So I hate waste. I love waste. I love making use of waste. It's like one of my favorite subjects, but I totally think that that's connected. Well, that was the challenge, is he couldn't and wouldn't really share stories with us. So we had the big picture story. He had the numbers on his arm. I would always want to know more and more and more, but he would want to protect us from that. So he couldn't really share details of the stories. I loved asking as much as I could about who his parents were. I never got to meet my grandparents, and about his brothers, and what his house was like, what his family was like. So I try to get as much of those type of stories as I could. But it was really hard for him to share. I know they hung out, my parents hung out with other survivors, other grina, as we call them, other survivors. And I think amongst themselves they talked and they shared stories, which is good. But I know for so many survivors, and definitely for my dad, it's too hard to share the details of the trauma and what he witnessed and what he was exposed to with us. But I was young also, when I went to Poland on the March of the Living, when I was preparing to go on that trip, we did speak in greater detail. But, he passed away when I was just a freshman in college, so that's, I thought I was so, adult then, but that's still quite young.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah, the word was definitely always survivor, as opposed to victim.
Yes, of course.
And that's definitely something that I carry with me about him, and I think is inside of me, is the ability to do anything, to get out of anything, that we're, that everything is possible, that we can do it. And
That's what he told you, like whenever
I don't know if he would say it, but he modeled it.
Right.
He would not complain about anything whatsoever. He was, when he couldn't make it to the Passover Seder, because that was when he was when he had cancer and when he was suffering the most. That was the sign that we knew that things were really, really bad, because we knew how silently he'd been suffering, just how resilient his body was, and how he would push and he would just always be so, so strong. And then when he couldn't make it, that was, the first sign that, that he really, I can't even imagine the immense pain that he was in because throughout our whole lives, he could never complain about anything. Yeah, he could just do anything. Nothing would bother him. Nothing was too gross. Nothing was too, he could do anything. He could fix anything. And he would never give up. So, when other people were sending cars to mechanics to be fixed and sending them to the shop, like, he would spend hours and hours and hours and hours, like, with his head under the hood fixing the car until it was fixed. Or same with anything that was broken. Our house was filled with things, and it was so frustrating to me as a kid, because I would go to all of my friends' homes and they would be so clean and clutter-free, and ours would just be, there were collections of jars filling the in the basement, tons of canned food and all kinds of supplies, and then, every piece of, like, cardboard or metal or, broomstick or anything, like, we had them all. And as a kid, I was, like, outraged and totally annoyed and embarrassed by it, but
You know what I mean?
I think it's just something innate in human beings, the innate, like, will to survive. No, I think it's, I just have to guess, like, feeling positive, about life, and having seen beauty in life, and having had love and relationships and connection, and knowing deep down that what's happening is unjust and wrong, and needing to survive, and, be there to tell the world we survived. Yeah. I think the more, there are terrible, terrible things happening in this world, and one thing I'm good at is trying to find positive in things, and I think, at least, in my own country right now, as things are getting worse, like, what I'm seeing is that people are getting engaged and enraged and becoming much more active. So, there are always the people who are active and involved, and there are other people who tend to just be a little bit more apathetic, or think, they don't have power and control. But right now, I think things are getting to a point where people can't sit idly by, and so I think people are hearing the stories of people who are being discriminated against, where other genocides are happening, or people are opening up their ears to listen more and are realizing that, and are starting to feel more empowered and activated.
Yeah.
So, being involved in being active and being involved, you're exposed to. I mean, worked in trauma for so many years. I worked in sex abuse, domestic violence. I know about the Holocaust. I'm close to that history, so I've seen the ugliest sides of our society. But I'm really blessed as a social worker, as a human, as someone who's really involved in things, to see the beauty of people and how much care and concern and connection and sense of community there is in this world. So. I just traveled for over a year throughout India, Myanmar, Burma, I've been to Cambodia, all places. And my message that I take away from around the world is like how much is possible, and just positive energy, and how connected we are as humans, and how humans want to be connecting with each other, and how people want to be doing good and bringing it into the world, and how people are doing these amazing, creative, artistic, community building projects everywhere. So I get to see that. I get to see these things. So I feel, I get to feel good about humanity. It's not, and I try to not focus on the news, because to me, I have a problem with what's covered in the media and is called news, because I think, the positive things that are happening in our world when a community is getting together and they're organizing a sharing opportunity. To me, that's news too, not just when someone is shot. And so I think we have ways of perpetuating more violence and trauma when we could be sharing the positivity of our connection and community, and using that to spread these messages, because that's what happens. We inspire each other. I think it's like, I think it kind of goes both ways. In a certain sense, I have beautiful trust in humanity and people, and that. And though at the same time, I do most of my travel solo, connecting with humans all over the place and having incredible experiences. And I'm not right now. I'm not tied into a relationship. I've been in plenty of relationships, but I've spent a lot of time also not, and I haven't committed to someone. I haven't, raised children, and I do, if I were to, really try to analyze it, I do think that is connected, because, I feel like I need to be like strong and secure and be able to handle things on my own, and sometimes. I think on a personal level, I think I do. I think we inherit this tendency to put up blocks and walls and defenses, and so I think it's hard sometimes to let people in. So, even with my siblings, we have great love for each other, and in a way, close relationship, but in certain ways, I find we're all very walled, very have our defenses, we have our walls. So.
How many siblings do you have?
2 sisters.
2 sisters.
So I feel like there isn't necessarily sharing of our thoughts and fears and emotions, and that's I think we inherit that. Well, I thought it was really interesting. In reading through some of the stories, you would he would describe having seen so many dead bodies, and having seen people be shot and killed, and what all of that violence was like. But what struck me were a couple of the stories that were more about the dehumanizing and the degrading behavior, and those seem to have really deep impacts on him as well. Not more or less, just differently so than something like the more physical violence. And even when I'm sharing those stories with high school or school-aged children, I see that creates the greatest audible emotion that I can hear from them. So there's one story about an old man, I think it was probably in his 70s or 80s, with a long gray beard, and the Germans made him perform, or were trying to ridicule him and made him perform some rituals in front of everyone, and then they grabbed him by his beard and they grabbed it and they literally ripped the beard off of his face. So I think my dad described a story like that, and another one when he had snuck a tiny piece of potato into his mouth when that was one of the jobs that he was working on in one of the camps, very briefly. And the guard made him spit out the potato from his mouth and told him to reopen his mouth, and then the guard spit inside. So it was just interesting to me that he shared some of those specific stories, really about, so it really just brought alive to me, obviously, how deeply impacting seeing so much death and violence was, but how on top of that, the emotional, psychological, dehumanizing actions really stayed with him. Yeah, like thousands and thousands of emotions about it. But then I try to see it in a larger picture, a larger context, and how do these things build up? And that's why I think it's so important to share these stories, to learn the history, to understand, to prevent it from happening again. But that's the problem, is that it keeps on happening again. Even with our own country, I'm terribly alarmed by the things that are happening. There are lots of things that smell very familiar to these stories. So yeah, I feel angry, I feel enraged, but I feel, it's all part of a context, I feel it's very compelling for me now to connect with, Germans and Poles who are, also descendants of people who are involved in the Holocaust, for whatever their families' experiences might have been. I think we're all kind of carrying something with us and have to grapple with it, learn from it. For me, those words go together, many social workers, even in the work I was doing around sexual abuse and domestic violence, hate the word victim. I think it's like semantics, it's poetry, it's art, language that we use. So as I was mentioning, even in my work, with domestic violence, sexual abuse, so many of my colleagues hate the word victim and would only refer to people as survivors. And I, on the other hand, think it's important to give people the opportunity to be a victim and to be, a survivor, because there's no question of, that what happened has this lasting impact, going through the generations. And there was a terrible thing that happened, and we were victims to it, and we survived it. So I always use both words together, victim/survivor. That's kind of my way around it. But I do, think to me, victim, it indicates having gone through an experience. It doesn't indicate having been defeated entirely by it. It just honors the experience that did take place, and surviving is what we do. That's our human innate instinct. Yeah. Well, I think it really shaped who I am and what I do, and is so, deep inside of me. I think it makes me a more, the things that I bring to the world that I think are good for the world, I think come from this experience of being the child of a survivor, and from his story, which is my story. Trying to be an aware person, trying to be an engaged person. I think, it heightens my sense of empathy, and my ability to work with survivors of all kinds of, trauma and abuse, or just to be conscious of issues as they arise for folks, and to be part of healing the world. So it's just made me much more conscious of I think my being an environmentalist and my being a social worker and my being, I think it's all connected.
Yes, of course it is.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so maybe that's the reason. Maybe, so I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding the question of like if there is a reason, that it happened, or kind of what is the good that comes out of it. I think it's being able to share, the impact and the connections. Yeah, I think one of the things is like you can't take it out of me. Like it's just it's who I am. I can't describe. But I can't differentiate between what is my work, what is my Judaism, what is my religion, what is my spirituality, what is my way of living, what is my being a human. To me, it's all the same. Yeah, and I think that's part of what was instilled in me, in being the child of a Holocaust survivor, is that kind of that these things are all one. And so that was, but in terms of being labeled as a Jew, when I'm traveling around, like, I'm in Jordan or I'm in other countries, and it's powerful. People come up to me and say, are you Jewish? Like it's really interesting to me. It's part of me. Part of what my dad survived for was to get to a place and he felt so much value and pride in this country, in America, and the freedom and the justice, and it meant the world to him to be an American and instilled that in us. So I think this is my privilege that his survival and coming to America, created for me. So I have white skin, I live in America. I can be Jewish.
Yes.
So I don't have to hide. It's a very different experience than what feels so close still to the person you describe. But it does scare me what's happening in my country today. It doesn't feel impossible. That's, as they're trying to keep Muslim individuals out, and to me, it's the same exact thing. I'd be happy to raise my hand and say I'm Muslim and join the line and do whatever we need to do. But it doesn't seem unlikely that one day they're going to say, line up the Jews too. But, it's very dangerous and scary what's happening right now in this country and so many across the world. Well, that's the other slogan. There was always never again and forgive, never forget, was the slogan that really always stuck with me in all of my Holocaust education and going to museums and things like that. Forgive, never, forgive, maybe, forget, never. For me, in all my world travels, blessed to interact with people from Germany, people from Poland, people from Ukraine, people from all different countries who were very, connected to the Holocaust. It's possible when I meet someone, I can't lie, it goes in my head, I wonder if your grandfather killed my grandfather. But that said, I relish in the opportunity to be in this next generation and to engage with each other and to realize we're all victim of an era of this hatred, of this venom, of this destruction. I think we need to be talking about it and sharing our stories as, tools of forgiveness, of healing, of connection, of community, of being one. Yeah, well, now that I'm back from traveling the world and interacting with amazing people and cultures all around this globe, people are saying, well, what are you doing now? Like, how are you making a living? And my answer is, well, I'm living. I'm not making a living. And I think part of it is really recognizing that life is short. I think the lessons I learned from, my dad's survival of the Holocaust, from both of my parents' battle with cancer, from seeing people be killed on the streets every day, being hit by cars and trucks. I see the fragility of life. It could disappear from us any minute. Life is precious. We're blessed to have it. We have beautiful resources and skills and talents, and there's so much to enjoy: the natural environment, other people, connection, community. And so I'm living more than I'm making a living. Really enjoying those things.